Happy Loving Day to AhnnaLise and Garth. Thank you for joining us so that our church and community can learn about this holiday and hear from a couple that not that long ago could not have legally been a couple.
Yep.
So before we get into all of that, would you mind introducing yourselves to us?
Sure. I'm AhnnaLise Stevens-Jennings, and I'm currently, until Sunday, the Director of Youth Ministry at Aldersgate UMC, and I will shortly be an Associate Pastor at Braddock Street UMC in Winchester. Let's see, what else is important to know about me? I'm a huge nerd. And I love to go to comic book conventions and Renaissance fairs, and anything else? Is that good enough? And we play a lot of D&D.
Yeah, D&D and cosplay are two of the hobbies that I almost exclusively associate with you, AhnnaLise. So.
I appreciate that a lot, actually.
And I also love that when coronavirus hit and you're in youth ministry, you're like, perfect. We can just do D&D for hours.
This is the perfect moment for me. Yes, it was amazing.
Garth, how about you?
Well, I'm Garth Stevens-Jennings, and I am I'm currently the youth ministry developer at Christ Lutheran Church up in DC. And I am an even bigger nerd than AhnnaLise is, because I like everything she likes, plus video games.
Yeah, I've heard stories about AhnnaLise trying to get into video games that you're into and it not always working out.
Does not always work.
It works sometimes.
Okay.
I introduced you to D&D, right?
That is true. Yeah, you taught me how to play in college.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. So thank you both again for being with us. I think I only learned about Loving Day probably like within the last decade, and I'm more than a decade old. So I went through much of my life without knowing about it. So I wonder if you can give us an introduction to what today's holiday, Loving Day, is.
Yeah, so today we're celebrating, it is called Loving Day, not only because that's a great title, but also because of the last name of the couple that were in a legal battle against the state of Virginia, so it was known as Loving versus Virginia, to have the legal right to be married. They were a couple that looked a lot like us, with the wife was a Black woman and the husband is a white man, and they were married. I think technically they got married in DC, and then they moved back to Virginia, which was where their home was. And someone, I guess, reported them to the Virginia law enforcement, and they were arrested in their own home for being married. And so they then had this legal battle, and because of the outcome of that, it became legal to get married across racial lines in Virginia. And it was a big deal court case that set a standard that would be able to be used across the rest of the country.
Wow. It's still surprising to hear about people being arrested in their own home for
which was rough, but we got through.
Yep.
And then I followed you to seminary, Wesley Theological Seminary. And do you want to tell the engagement story?
Sure. So yeah, we did, that year apart was really rough. It was his senior year at Emory and my first year at Wesley. But we stayed in touch. We talked every day, got on Skype and like hung out. We played D&D with his friends, which was fun because the internet at Wesley was terrible, and I would literally like sneak into the like academic buildings where there was an Ethernet hookup so that I could like sit there on my laptop and play, which was fun. I had like janitorial staff more than once like, "Are you supposed to be in here?" And I would just smile at them and then they would walk away. I was like, okay, good. So it was fun. Then Garth came to Wesley, and we started talking about what it would be like if we got married. So once we were both kind of decided that that was the direction we were heading in, I decided that it would probably take too long for him to propose to me, so I decided to propose to him. It was really fun, and I got to involve lots of our friends and family, and at that point we were all pretty scattered, so I asked folks to send us little videos about kind of what they thought of our relationship and kind of blessing the idea of us getting married. And so they sent them in, which was really cool. And one of our Wesley friends, who is better at tech things than I am, helped me put it together. And then we went to King Street here in Alexandria, actually, which is fun because that's where we ended up living, and we didn't know that was going to happen. But it was just a nice, pretty quiet place. And so we went out there one day, 2 days before my birthday.
Yes.
Right? And no, it was on my birthday. We went on my birthday down to King Street. Yes.
We got married.
That's right. So we went down to King Street and I showed him the video and asked him to marry me, and he said yes. And then we went to dinner at a place called Medieval Madness because we're nerds, which was fun. And so we got to like watch people sword fight and sing old songs. And the restaurant actually had the same menu as the coronation feast of Henry the Fifth, which was really fun. So it was good and a lot of fun, and it was a perfect representation of who we are. So, so that was good.
That's fantastic. So, so then once it was official and you were going to get married, I wonder how those conversations went. I mean, clearly you had already done through the proposal, you had already gotten folks to offer their blessing. Did you have to navigate any difficult conversations around around your engagement and plans to get married?
Yes, but it's interesting because we didn't have anyone say that they didn't think that we should be married. What we had were things that we had to like deal with the blending of our families, right? So stuff like explaining to family members that it's not okay to just kind of like touch my hair without permission. I got a lot of that, of like, ooh, that's interesting, grab. I'm like, okay, cool, thanks. I'm not actually a pet, but all right. Or like, you know, some of the younger relatives on Garth's side of the family were used to some casual use of some words that aren't great to use. And so there was some like gentle correcting of that. What else?
We had to explain to people that we didn't want them fetishizing our potential children, because that turned out to be a bit of an issue.
Yeah, there was a lot of, oh, you guys are gonna have such cute babies. Like, okay. Which is like, again, doesn't seem like it would be an inappropriate thing to say. Like, okay, thanks. But would you say that to every other couple? And some people, they really would. Like, there are a lot of folks who would say like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to see your children, they'll be beautiful. And they'd say that to any couple, and that's fine. But you know, there are a lot of folks who have a very specific reason for saying that to an interracial couple, especially one that looks like us. And so that's sometimes fun to navigate as well, because you know, they're like, it's a compliment. I don't understand what you're, you know, it's like when people tell me how articulate I am, I'm like, okay, yes, but where is that coming from? Would you say that to anyone, or are you saying it because you're surprised that I specifically am articulate, right? But well, yeah, what else? We had some interesting family conversations about what future children, what that might look like. And there was some kind of like worry about that, that like wasn't told to us directly, but came to us from other sources. And so it was hard to navigate what was true and what wasn't, because it wasn't coming to us directly, but having to talk about how it really is okay for like children of our generation to not look like their parents, right? And that was interesting too. Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll come back to the wedding day in just a second, but having had to go through those conversations, and I know you've had others since, AhnnaLise, I hear you using the term gentle correction, and I wonder if I think that these days, particularly in this kind of upheaval around the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, and the protests and conversation around racism and police brutality and all of that, there are more conversations going on right now than typical, I think. And I know that I personally sometimes have to kind of push through some anxiety about having that kind of conversation. And so you all are probably well practiced at that. And I wonder if, from your experience, if you've got advice for folks that are afraid of having a direct conversation, and might more likely just talk with somebody else. Do you have any particular advice for folks that are feeling led to start conversations that are uncomfortable?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I think the first thing to remember is you're never not going to be afraid of having a difficult conversation with someone you care about. It's always going to be hard.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always going to be the fear in the back of your mind that this is what will break a relationship. But you have to have them anyway, because if you don't, the relationship will be broken anyway.
Yeah, I think, it takes a certain amount of bravery, that's for sure. And I think that there is something to be said for people being in different places on their journey, right? Like the family members that we have done the gentle correcting with, none of them would say the things that they said then now, right? And part of that is because we've been able to build a good relationship with them. And part of it is also just because they've grown as people, right? Like, with or without us, they would probably be here to some extent because they've grown as people in general. And so there's some things that just come with the exposure to the things that are happening in the world that are helpful, and being in communities where people are willing to have those conversations. So some of that might be because we were an example to them and were able to be, people that they knew that they could have those conversations with, and they knew would be safe spaces to talk about those things without too much judgment, right? For just trying to understand and to be able to move forward. So I think having a good amount of grace with people is important too. And it's hard because it's extremely important to strongly rebuke the system, and to maybe have a more gentle conversation with individuals if they really are trying, right? There's some folks that do need a shove, right? But there are other people who are going to respond a lot better with some gentle leading in the right direction. And so I think that comes with building relationships and knowing who those folks are and what it is that's going to take to get them to that place.
I think it's very important to strike an equilibrium between patience and pushing, because change doesn't happen without a catalyst. And if you're an interracial couple, then for many people in your family, you will be the first catalyst they've ever encountered. And so that change is going to take time, but it has to be actively pursued.
Thank you. I'm also conscious of the fact that that still puts some of the burden for change on the person who other people are having to adjust to. So I'll admit to my own fear in reaching out to you two, because I don't like that the idea of we need help adjusting to the idea of interracial marriage, and interracial couples are the ones to do the work to help us adjust to it. So that's an irony that still makes me very uncomfortable. And so I wonder if you can speak to that about what it's like to be a couple, or especially AhnnaLise, to be some groups kind of one Black friend.
Yeah.
And how you navigate that personally, in terms of when you say, okay, I'm open to having this conversation, and when you say, look, it's you don't need to ask, you don't. My body is not going to be sacrificed for your sanctification.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a great question, because that is a role that I've I've played most of my life. Like growing up in Winchester, which is not the most diverse place, it's becoming more so. And it's changed a lot since the time that I've like gone off to college and haven't been there all the time, right? But it is still a fairly homogenous place. And I am like one of those people that tends to be a bridge person, right? Like the neighborhood where my parents live, we're the Black family, the Hispanic family lives next door, and the Asian family lives 3 houses down. Like literally, right? So it's like, there you go, right? Like that is literally it. And so everybody else in that neighborhood is white, everyone else. And so it's really interesting to be that person and that family, because there are a lot of assumptions that people make. But I think one of the things that is the most important to me is being able to intentionally be a bridge for people. But there are a lot of folks who are like, no, go do your own research, right? Like that is not my job. And I feel that, like, I get it. Like I am tired, right? But I also think that this is a part of my calling. It's a part of where I am set in society as somebody who lives between worlds, is important to me. So not every person of color, not every Black person is gonna be super on board with that, with, hey, would you come speak? But I am, because that's a part of who I am personally. So it's definitely not across the board, but I'm not uncomfortable with being asked. Sometimes I get annoyed when the only reason I get asked to do specific things is because of my race. Like every once in a while, there will be things where they're like, hey, we need some Black people on the stage, go, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, don't love how that feels, right? Or in seminary, when I graduated, I was the second person to win the Lawrence Hull Stuckey Award for Leadership in Worship, which was really exciting, because I spent a lot of time working with the different kind of worshiping organizations at Wesley, to help lead worship and craft it and to pull it together. And I really love it. I love to write liturgy. It was important to me, and it was so exciting for me to be given that award. And as soon as I was given it, someone said to me, oh, they only did that because everybody else who won awards this year is white. And that broke me a little bit, because then like still I'm like, I don't know if I got it because I deserve it or if I got it because they needed some color on the stage. And so that hurts me, right? But being asked to come and speak on my experience doesn't, right? I am happy to help people learn and grow and get better, because I think that that's why I am a person who lives in the crossroads, in the in-between space. So yeah.
As far as burden and my experience, I think it's certainly a different dynamic if one of the people in the relationship is not, or if nobody in the relationship is white. But as someone in the relationship who is white, I naturally have the most social capital, and there's a lot less burden for me anywhere else regarding race. There's none anywhere else. The only burden I ever have placed upon me as far as race goes is in this relationship specifically. And so to the extent that a white person in an interracial relationship can take on the burden, I think they have a responsibility to. And so whenever we were talking to, like, say, my family to explain things, or friends of ours to explain things, if it was possible for me to do that alone, I would. Mm-hmm. Because AhnnaLise certainly has enough burdens on her already, as far as race goes.
Yeah, it's also like fun things, like there was an experiment that was put forward a few years ago that was like, if you are a woman, walk down the street and don't move, don't get out of the way for men. Because women often like will move themselves to let men pass by them, and it's just assumed that that's how it's going to be. And so they said, just try, just not getting out of the way, right? And so like I tried it for a while, and it was amazing how many people would just run straight into me and then look affronted because I hadn't moved, right? But then we would also try having him be on the inside, right? and people always moved around him. So we like, if we're in a crowd, he's the crowd cutter because people will move for him. So I'll walk behind him and people will navigate around, right? Which is amazing. And so like there are advantages to having a white guy as your husband because like you can get through crowds easier, you know. But yeah, like there are things that we're like that we are aware of, and that we like do work together to try and help. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Tell us about your wedding day, just for fun, so we can celebrate you.
Oh my goodness. Our wedding day was fun and exhausting and sometimes a disaster, which was good.
A bit of a comedy.
It was, but it was fun. We had a good time. We got married in my home church, which is Market Street in Winchester. And let's see, some of my favorite moments were that we had a bagpiper there because Garth's family has a lot of Scottish heritage. And so actually they're related to the people that make those super gross fruitcakes. What are they called? The like gross like brick of nasty Claxton fruitcakes. That's his family. But oh well. They used that money well and have an absolutely beautiful farm that's in like Asheville in North Carolina, so that's cool.
Maybe being my third cousin.
Yes, but they're still, Claxtons, they're related. But it's super Scottish family, right? And so Garth wore his family's tartan, and his mom wore the tartan sash at our wedding, which was cool. And she personally gifted us this bagpiper who piped us into our reception, which was really cool. That was an awesome, fun moment for us. And then we also had some fun disasters that came with like Garth not knowing how to sit in a skirt, and being like super, super nervous about that the whole time. And me not realizing that we should have practiced lighting the unity candle because we didn't, and that was also kind of hilarious. And yeah, didn't work. And so that was fun. I was like, we're just gonna hope that this is not a reflection on how this is gonna go. So far it has not been, so we're, that's good. And someone stole our wedding cake.
Yep.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, our wedding cake got stolen, which is fun. So, because yeah,
it was gone by the end of the reception.
Right, like they're supposed to save you like the part of it, and the whole idea is you eat it, like you eat it again a year later, which sounds gross. So I'm kind of glad that it wasn't around. But like, oh well. But so we had the lady who made our cake was really wonderful, and she made a gluten-free version for his gluten intolerant family. And she also made this beautiful like top tier that we were supposed to take home. So after the cake was cut and like served for everybody, she boxed up the top tier so that we could take it home. She said, it's going to be right here when you leave. And when we left, it was not there. And we have no idea what happened to it. We don't know. It was gone. It was gone.
Hopefully they enjoyed the cake.
Whoever took it home, I hope they enjoyed it. Yes.
Very dirty bathroom floor, and I just spent the next 20 minutes washing it out by hand in the bathroom sink. That was a fun time.
That was fun. I was like, "Where's Garth? He's just been gone for a while. I don't know what's going on." I had to send one of the groomsmen after him, and then he came back. He's like, "He's having some issues." So I was like, "Okay, all right. I'm not gonna ask any more questions about that." Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Also, we didn't know how exactly to like tie up my train. So I was tripping over it the entire time we did our first dance, so that was fun too. But it was mostly good.
On a positive note, we wrote the liturgy.
Yeah, that was fun.
And
yeah, because we mixed together the Methodist Church like marriage liturgy and the Episcopal Church marriage liturgy. So that was a lot of fun. We had a good time putting them together and getting to incorporate like our families in it in really interesting and fun ways, and like having my dad get to sing and that kind of stuff. So it was good.
It
was a good day.
Thank you for sharing.
Very tiring. We went to the Renaissance Festival the very next day. That was our honeymoon, was going to Ren Fair together, which was great. We bought a sword. It's on the wall behind us. You can't see it. But that was like the thing we bought the day after our wedding, a sword.
That's so on brand for the Stevens-Jennings family.
No, we're good. We're good.
That's great. Well, we mentioned at the top that that today is Loving Day, the anniversary of the Supreme Court decision that that struck down the arrest and law prohibiting interracial marriage in Virginia. It was Loving versus Virginia for those Virginians out there, that it happened in our state and nearby. And we mentioned that there are people alive now who, when they were born, it was before this day. That they were born in a time when that was illegal, and I'm curious what you might say to folks who are listening who might have been raised in a place or in a family or in a community that that said people should, quote unquote, stay with their own race. If that's part of how somebody was raised to think and believe, what might you say to them today?
Well, the first thing I would want to say to them, especially if they're someone I don't know. So again, like if I don't have the ability to the gentle correction, I'm just going to say, well, that's racist.
Yeah.
That's the start of that conversation. First of all, it's racist. It's not right.
Yeah. Bullet one. That's
bullet
racist.
one. That's racist. What is what's the fear? What is at stake? What do they think is going to be lost if they were to enter into that kind of relationship? Like, what is it about it that makes them say this should be a hard and fast rule? I'd want to know what the basis for that is, because I think for some folks, when they talk it out, they would realize, oh, actually, that's stupid, right? But I think that there are some people who really might then start to uncover that they really do have some like deep racial issues that they need to work out, right? So either way, I think asking that question first would be a good starting point.
I love that question for so many other contexts as well. Even if we can ask ourselves, what am I afraid of, and what's at stake? And what's at stake around this issue right now? Thank you.
Yeah.
What else?
I think there are a lot of people for whom race and culture are synonymous, and for whom the two cannot be extracted from each other. And I think the important thing to remember when thinking about either of those things is that culture is a social construct, and so is race. And so they are things that humans create in order to understand ourselves and each other. And so neither can ever be more important than humanity itself. And they are only useful and only valuable insofar as they help us be ourselves. And the moment they stop doing that, they become toxic.
Yeah. I think
Can you say that? Can you say that one more time? Because I think that was significant. I'd love to hear it one more time.
So race and culture are both socially constructed, which means that they are created by humans. They are not inherent parts of reality. And so they are only useful insofar as they help us to understand ourselves, to understand each other, and to be ourselves authentically. The moment they stop being useful for that, they become detrimental to humanity. And so our culture and our race can never be more important than humanity itself, because they are products of humanity.
I love that, because what I hear in that really well articulated is how culture and race needn't be erased. That they can serve a purpose in reflecting difference, which is to be celebrated. That culture, so saying there's no such thing as race is not actually the most helpful thing.
No.
But it's when it turns from a way to express uniqueness and value to only divide and degrade. That's when those social constructs stop being cultural features and start being cultural weapons.
Right.
Yes.
Well, and I think it's also important to remember that these things are not monolithic. Race did not always exist. race wasn't really a relevant social concept until the late Middle Ages. And culture, well, the culture we have now in the United States, none of it's more than 300 years old. And it's constantly changing. People in the 1770s would look at us now and say that we're un-American. We would look at them and a lot of things they did and say the same. And so it's never useful, I think, to look at culture or to look at race as something that is static, because it isn't, and it never has been, and it never will be. And so we need to learn to allow these things to change.
So what I hear from both of you is that for folks who might have been raised in a context where they understood that people were supposed to kind of stay with their own race, you would invite them to ask what's at stake, and then to get pretty reflective about their own culture and understanding of race, and where it comes from and what purpose it serves in their life.
Yes.
That's really helpful to me, and I think to lots of folks to hear. So thank you very much. I guess I'd like to end by looking forward a little bit to notice that. So 53 years ago was when Loving versus Virginia was decided, and so if we think 50 or so years in the future, do you have? Are you glass half full or glass half empty about the next 50 years? Do you have hope especially in the midst of this moment right now, which to me, it feels different than other moments in my lifetime. And I wonder if you can talk about that, looking forward to the next 50 years or so.
Yeah. I was thinking a lot about that question. And one of the things that is interesting to me is that I have a very good friend at my current church who is also in an interracial marriage. And she and her husband are significantly older than Garth and I. Not, well, about old enough to be our parents, like that's about right. Maybe a little younger than that. They would have had to have us pretty young, but that's still, technically, right? So she's told me stories, like we've shared stories a lot about what it's been like to be in interracial marriages. And she told me about when she and her husband lived in Ohio and walked into a church and were told, you need to find another church. Like they hadn't even sat down, like they walked in and someone walked up to them and said, this is not your place. You need to go someplace else. And she was telling me recently, she was like, I don't know still to this day if that person was protecting me or not, right? Like, I don't know if what they were trying to do was say, this is not going to be safe for you, right? Or if they were trying to make sure that I was going to be okay, that we were going to be okay, or if they were just being jerks about it, right? Like, I'm not sure. But she's like, but either way, I'm glad that didn't happen, right? And she also told a story about looking for rental homes because he's in the military. And they're traveling around the country and in different places looking for a place to live and having them be denied places to live because they were a couple. And so she's told us those experiences. And so I think about that in relationship to us, and I'm like, well, that's very different, right? Like we haven't had those experiences, which is wonderful, right? We've never walked into a church and been told that we need to leave. And we have so far not had anyone discriminate against us for where we live. But true. And now in Virginia. Okay. But then she's also told us stories about really hard conversations that she had with her family where she had relatives say, well, what about those little blonde grandbabies that you promised me, right? So she's said that, and I said, ooh, that feels familiar, right? Because we've had to have those conversations of like, okay, well, it really is going to be okay if, because Garth is the third Garth in his family, right? His dad's name is Garth and his grandfather's name is Garth. And so there was a conversation about like, well, will we carry that on? If we have a son, is his name going to be Garth, right? And it was interesting for us to talk about what it would look like to have a little brown boy named Garth in this family, right? And so like we talked about that with them. And so it was interesting how those conversations were reflective of each other, right? But there are some experiences that we haven't had, which is really good. So I do think that things have definitely changed in a good way and we're moving in a good direction. And so I definitely hope in 50 years that this conversation looks really different. And I've seen a lot of information, studies, speculating, looking into the future, saying that the world in general, and especially the United States, is going to look a lot different, and there are going to be a lot of people that identify as mixed race in the next generation. That already Generation Alpha, so the one that follows Gen Z, is extremely diverse. And they are extremely mixed race, more so than any other generation that's come before them so far. So that's really interesting and promising to me, that there are a lot of things that are shifting, and there are going to be new problems that crop up with that, right? But I think that right now I'm hopeful that things are looking better in the future. What do you think?
I'm a lot more glass half full this month than I was last one. The murder of George Floyd happened. It started with an uproar that was very similar to that of Philando Castile and Trayvon Martin and others. But this time, there were so many people who didn't seem to listen with those other incidents that now are listening. I don't know if that's just my perception, but it seems like the tide is finally shifting. And so I'm a lot more hopeful now than I was a little while ago.
Yeah, I feel similarly, that there's a lot more folks who are listening. I'll also confess that this was the instance where I ended up actually using the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And it's not that I didn't believe it beforehand, but it's that I was trying to be gentle. For folks for whom that was a big trigger, I did not want to alienate them for a long time. And this time, this is me confessing my own sin, because I'm like, I'm managing my social media presence in this way. But there was something about this time that I felt even more emboldened to do so, and B, it didn't feel like it was going to cost me as much in terms of like social capital, because there are more folks that are coming around to seeing how important it is to actually say that. So I don't like that about myself, but it's a data point in the process that I think is significant, that there's more folks that are seeing the importance of saying stuff like Black Lives Matter, and opening themselves to other conversations.
Yes.
So I think I feel similarly to you, Garth, and I also have a significant cynic bone in my body that's kind of just wondering when this is going to fizzle out and change. So it's my ongoing prayer that we are given ways to keep the conversation going.
Yes.
Even if it's not taking it up as much as the news cycle. But that helps because so many of us are just glued to the news cycle. So I do hope it sticks around longer, but even when that's not the case, I'm praying that we have more reasons to keep the conversation going. So I thank you both very much for your willingness to have this conversation today, for your grace in welcoming us into your home and your story. And you are transitioning in a number of different ways right now. Do you want to share what's next for your family?
Yeah, so the end of June, we are moving to Winchester, which is, again, my hometown, which is crazy. That doesn't happen very often, that you get to go back and serve in your hometown. So I get to go back and start as the associate pastor at Braddock Street UMC. And Garth, what are you looking at?
I'm going to continue to be the youth ministry developer at Christ Lutheran Church for the foreseeable future, because it's all online right now. So
Yeah.
remote is really an issue.
Yeah,
Yes.
at the moment.
that's great.
So we're excited. We're looking forward to it. The house we're moving into has a pond in the backyard with a fish in it. So I get a fish, which is really exciting. His name is Phineas, which is awesome. And we are excited to bring our cat with us. And we also have a pair of rats. And so they're coming with us too. And we're looking around for dogs to adopt once we get out there. So it's very exciting. Lots of animals. We just have a menagerie. It's great.
Well, I love that. And once it's safe to do so, I look forward to inviting myself over to
Please.
meet. And thank you in person for your graciousness to me and your friendship. And the lights just came back on
Oh
at church,
yeah.
which is nice. So before we leave, can I offer a blessing on your marriage?
Please.
Okay, let's pray. Almighty God, through your Son, Jesus Christ, you have made us one in your spirit. In the same way that you are one within yourself. And you've given us the gift of marriage as a sign of that oneness. I give thanks for the unity which you have accomplished in the life of Garth and AhnnaLise. And to the degree that it's a unity that other folks might not have been used to. And it's been an occasion for people to learn about themselves. I give you thanks. I ask that you bless their marriage, especially in this time of transition. Bless their marriage and their life together as they go into Winchester. Guard and protect them as citizens of Winchester, especially in a time when the evil and the sin of racism is closer to the surface than sometimes it has been. Guard and protect them, guide them in every way, and at all times fill them and their marriage with the love that comes from you. All this we pray in Christ's name, amen.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I look forward to seeing you sometime soon and giving you a hug.
Yes, please.
All right, talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.